Hi there. I am so happy you found your way to Starlet Sinister tonight. I know you are here to escape the noise, so here is my promise. Only few short ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, silence. The rest of the video is completely ad-free so you can sleep undisturbed. I've dug deep to bring you fresh stories that you won't find anywhere else. I wanted to bring you something real. If that sounds good to you, a sub would help me a lot. Before you close your eyes, let me know one thing in the comments. What is the weather like outside your window right now? I love imagining where you all are listening from. Now, get comfortable. Let the dark in. Here is story number one. The first thing I remember is the quiet. Not the calm kind, but the kind that presses on your ears until you notice your own breathing. That silence had weight, like the room was waiting on me. At the time, I blamed the hour. I stayed awake late most nights back then. Sleep came harder after my sister moved out and the house stopped feeling full. This took place in Glenmere, Ohio, during an autumn that felt longer than usual. Leaves piled up along the sidewalks and stayed there, damp and dark. The air always smelled like rain that never fully fell. The town library sat behind my apartment building. Low, wide, and made of dark brick that held the cold. I could see its back windows from my kitchen sink. I didn't work there. I was just someone who watched things. Writing things down had become a habit after I forgot something important once and lost a friend over it. Most nights I made tea and sat near the window. I waited for the lights in the library to shut off one by one. When the last light went out, the building never looked fully empty. That autumn rain came in thin sheets, not storms, just steady drops that soaked into the ground. The smell of wet leaves stayed even on dry days. One night, close to 2, a light stayed on inside the library. It wasn't bright, just a pale square low to the ground. It flickered like it might disappear. At the time, it felt normal. Old buildings always had strange wiring. I told myself that and kept writing. The light went out, then it came back on. I stopped typing and watched. My reflection in the glass looked tired and washed out. The light held steady, like someone had decided not to leave. I noticed the smell next. Even with the window closed, damp earth reached me. It didn't match the rain. The next morning, the library looked the same. Dark brick, trees dropping leaves no one ever cleaned up. I went inside that afternoon for a book I didn't need. The air smelled like dust and polish, nothing else. Near the back, a small display sat behind glass. Old boots, faded letters, a journal open to a crowded page. The label said it belonged to a caretaker from decades ago. No name was listed, just dates and notes about overnight routines. I leaned closer, then pulled back. The glass felt colder than it should have. The chill stayed in my fingers. That night, the light returned, later than before, past 3. It glowed steady and low. I noticed movement this time, not a clear shape, just a change in the light. Like something passed between it and the wall. My chest tightened for no clear reason. I checked the time twice. The smell came back stronger. I opened the window a little. Cold air slipped in, heavy with the scent of soil. It reminded me of the day we buried our dog years earlier. I closed the window and sat on the floor. Being lower felt safer without knowing why. I wrote until my hand cramped. Over the next week, the pattern stayed. The light appeared. The smell followed. Once, I heard another sound, a slow creak, like wood settling. It came from the direction of the library. I stopped looking straight at the windows. I focused on my notebook instead. Still, I always knew when the light came on. One evening before sunset, I walked behind the library. Leaves stuck to my shoes. The back door stood closed, paint peeling. A fenced garden sat there, overgrown and uneven. The ground looked disturbed, though nothing was fresh. I stood longer than I meant to. A library worker stepped outside and startled me. She asked if I needed something. I shook my head and apologized. That night, the light didn't appear. Instead, 3 soft knocks came from inside my wall. They were spaced too evenly. I held my breath and waited. The sound didn't return. Sleep never did. The next afternoon, the display case was gone. The journal and boots had been removed. No sign explained why. The clerk said the items were being stored. Her smile stayed small. She didn't look toward the back hallway. Rain turned into a cold drizzle that night. Trees swayed and dropped their last leaves. I sat by the window under a blanket I didn't need. When the light appeared, it was higher than before, stretched thin like it came through a narrow opening. It shifted slightly. My apartment felt different then. The air pressed down on my shoulders. The smell filled the room. I stepped away from the window. My bad habit kicked in, counting steps without thinking. 4 to the door, 3 to the hall. A sound drifted up from outside. Not loud, more like a scrape against stone. I didn't look. I sat on the floor again, knees pulled in. My notebook lay open and blank. Something thumped once, deep and solid. It came from near the garden, then nothing. Time passed strangely after that. Minutes felt stretched thin. The quiet returned heavier than before. When I finally looked, the light was gone. The library stood dark and still. The smell faded last. The next morning, workers stood behind the building. Fresh dirt lay in a long mound by the fence. I asked what they were fixing. One man said it was an old foundation issue, something overdue. He wiped his hands and went back to work. That night there was no light, no smell. Only the quiet again. I sat by the window anyway, waiting without knowing what for. My reflection stared back at me. Near dawn, a sound reached me. Soft, distant, like a door closing underground. It came from beneath the library. I wrote that down last. The pen pressed hard without meaning to. My hand shook. The sun rose gray and dull. The library looked settled, complete. That should have helped. Instead, it felt like something had finished without telling me. Like a choice had been made somewhere out of sight. I closed my notebook and waited. The quiet didn't break the way I expected. It stretched, thin and patient, like it knew I would keep waiting. I stayed where I was, the notebook closed on my lap, listening to the building breathe. Morning moved through the room without warmth. Light slid across the floor and stopped short of the window. I noticed how the smell never fully left. I skipped sleep and made more tea than I needed. My hand shook when I poured the water. I told myself it was just exhaustion. By noon, the workers were gone. The fence behind the library stood straight again. Fresh dirt had been packed down smooth. I walked closer than before. The ground felt firm under my shoes, too firm for how new it looked. I told myself not to linger. Standing there felt like hovering over a thought I didn't want, so I went back inside and shut my door. That evening came early. Clouds rolled in low, pressing the sky down. The air felt tight, like a room with no windows. I sat by the window out of habit, not watching this time, just being there. When the light returned, it didn't glow. It blinked once, then stayed dark. The smell rose anyway. I moved back from the glass. My chest felt hollow, like I'd missed a step. I counted again without meaning to. The sound followed soon after. Not scraping, not knocking. It was a soft drag, slow and uneven. It came from below, deep under the ground. Like something heavy being shifted, I pressed my ear to the floor. The wood felt cold. The sound faded when I held still. I didn't write. I didn't check the time. I waited for the next thing. Nothing came. The quiet settled in deeper than before. It felt finished. The next day, a notice went up on the library door. Closed for repairs. No reopening date listed. People in town talked about it briefly. Foundation problems. Old buildings settling. No one mentioned the smell. No one mentioned the light. I didn't either. Nights grew colder after that. Autumn leaned into winter without asking. The trees behind the building went bare. From my window, the library looked smaller, lower to the ground, like it had sunk a little. I stopped sitting by the glass. That was my choice, I told myself. It felt safer that way. But some nights I woke on the floor. Blanket pulled tight, heart racing. I never remembered lying down. Once I found dirt on my socks. Dark and dry, I washed them twice. Another night the smell crept in again. Faint, but clear. I stood in the hallway, unsure which room it came from. The sound returned weeks later, one slow pull, then another. It came at dawn when the sky was colorless. I stayed still, afraid movement would answer it. It stopped when the sun rose. I told myself it was pipes, old plumbing under old buildings. That made sense, if I didn't think too long. Winter came quietly. Snow fell and stayed. The world outside softened. Footprints crossed the sidewalk each morning. None ever crossed the garden behind the library. The snow there stayed untouched. I avoided looking. I learned the shape of the room by memory instead. Walls, door, table. One evening the power flickered. Lights dimmed, then steadied. The quiet shifted with it. That was when I heard it clearly, a door closing far below ground. Not loud, but final. The smell filled the apartment fast. Cold earth and something older. My throat tightened. I grabbed my coat without thinking. Keys shook in my hand. I didn't look back. Outside, the snow crunched under my feet. The library loomed darker than the sky. Its windows reflected nothing. I stopped halfway down the sidewalk. Turning felt wrong. Staying felt worse. The sound came again. Closer this time. A slow drag beneath the ground. I stood there, breath fogging the air. Every instinct pulled in a different direction. My body chose none of them. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The cold crept in first. Then the quiet pressed close again. I'm still here when I think about it, between the step forward and the step back, listening. Story number 2. The night always started the same way, with the porch light clicking on by itself. Not bright, just enough to show the steps. Lena noticed it even when she tried not to. She lived across the field from the place everyone avoided once June came. A low stretch of brick buildings sat there, quiet in summer, like they were holding their breath. When the students left, the sound seemed to leave with them. Lena wasn't meant to be watching it. She reminded herself of that almost every night. She was just a neighbor who stayed awake too late, folding laundry or rinsing cups that were already clean. That summer felt slow and damp, not stormy, just gray days stacked on top of each other. Everything smelled wet, even inside her house. From her kitchen window, she could see the edge of the grounds, a wide lawn, uneven in places, sloping toward a line of old trees. The buildings sat back from it all like they preferred distance. Lights were meant to be off after sunset. That was something she knew for sure. Someone had once told her the timers were strict. One evening, close to 10, a single window stayed lit. It wasn't high up or important looking, just a soft glow near the ground. Lena paused with a towel in her hands. At the time, it felt normal. Old places forgot things. She turned away and finished what she was doing. When she looked back, the light was gone. That should have been the end of it. The next night, the light returned. Same window, same low, steady glow. Lena sat down without meaning to. She counted how long it stayed on. 7 minutes, then dark. She mentioned it to her sister on the phone. Her sister laughed and said Lena always noticed strange details. Lena didn't argue. Rain moved in again, soft and steady. The field darkened under the porch light. Frogs started calling near the ditch. On the third night, something crossed the lawn. Not fast, not slow either. It moved in a straight line from the trees toward the building. Lena leaned closer to the glass, careful not to touch it. Her breath stayed shallow. She couldn't see details, just a shape, low and covered, like something being dragged or carried. The rain blurred the rest. Her stomach tightened for no clear reason. She stepped back and told herself she was tired. Watching shadows could do that. Sleep came in short pieces after that. She lay awake listening to rain and old walls settling. The clock felt louder than usual. Near midnight, the porch light clicked off. That usually meant nothing. That night, it felt like a decision. The next day passed quietly. No lights, no movement. Lena cleaned out a drawer she had avoided for years. Old notes, receipts, a birthday card she never sent. She threw most of it away. That evening, the rain stopped. The air felt thick, like it was holding something back. Crickets started early. The light came on before dark. Earlier than before. Lena noticed right away. She stood at the sink and watched. The window glowed, dimmed, then glowed again, as if something passed in front of it. Her chest tightened. She pressed her lips together and waited. Nothing followed. Later, she heard a sound closer to home, a soft scrape along the edge of her yard, like something dragged over wet grass. She froze with one foot on the stairs. The sound stopped. Even the insects went quiet. After a long moment, she turned off the kitchen light. Dark felt safer without knowing why. She didn't look outside again. Morning arrived pale and ordinary. Flattened grass showed where rain had fallen hard. Nothing she could point to. She walked to the edge of her property. The ground was soft but smooth. No marks stayed. A notice hung on the campus gate. Closed for seasonal maintenance. The paper moved in the breeze. Lena went back home and made coffee she didn't finish. Her hand shook when she set the mug down. She blamed nerves. That night, the lights stayed off. The field stayed still. Relief came quietly. Just before bed, the dragging sound returned. Faint but clear. It came from the trees. Lena stood barefoot on cold tile. Her heart beat too loud. She held her breath. A shape moved at the edge of the porch light, not stepping into it, just close enough to dim it. She backed away slowly. Running felt wrong, like an answer she didn't want to give. From the bedroom, she watched the light flicker. It went out, came back, then went out again. This time it stayed dark. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed. Time stretched thin. Sleep never came. In the morning, she found mud on the bottom step, just a smear, easy to miss. She cleaned it without thinking, didn't take a photo, didn't tell anyone. By the fourth night, the light returned. 2 windows this time, both low and steady. Lena stood with her coat on. Her keys were already in her pocket. She didn't sit down. Something crossed the field again, slower now, stopping once before moving on. The air smelled wrong. Not rain, not soil. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The light across the field dimmed at the same moment, as if it noticed. Lena stayed there longer than she meant to. The boards under her feet felt damp and soft. The quiet pressed in from all sides. She thought about going back inside. She thought about walking forward instead. Neither felt right. The light held steady, low, and patient. The field looked flatter than before, like it had been pressed down. A faint sound drifted across the grass. Not scraping now, more like a slow pull. Lena's shoulders tightened. She counted her breaths to stay still. 1, 2, 3. The sound stopped when she stopped counting. That felt important. She didn't know why. She stood between the open door and the dark yard. Inside felt too small. Outside felt too close. The porch light hummed softly above her. The field didn't move. The windows stayed lit. Lena didn't step forward. She didn't step back either. She just listened. The door stayed open longer than it should have. Cool air slid past Lena's ankles and into the house. She didn't move until the porch light clicked off by itself. Dark settled fast after that. Not just outside, but inside her chest, too. She closed the door gently, like sound mattered. Sleep didn't come. She lay on the bed without turning on a lamp, staring at the ceiling fan. Each slow spin felt louder than the last. Sometime before dawn, she noticed a smell. It wasn't strong, just a thin trace of something damp and old. She sat up and listened. The house made its normal sounds, pipes ticking, wood cooling. Still the smell stayed. It reminded her of creek beds after water pulled back, exposed and forgotten. Morning arrived without color. The sky looked flat and white. No shadows anywhere. Lena stepped outside and checked the porch. The boards were clean. No mud this time. Across the field, the building sat low and quiet. No lights. No movement. She told herself it was over, that whatever pattern she'd noticed had broken. That felt reasonable in daylight. She moved through the day carefully. Every action felt chosen instead of natural. Even breathing took effort. By afternoon, clouds gathered again. Not rain clouds, just weight. The kind that pressed down without release. Lena tried not to look out the window. She failed more than once. The field stayed empty. At dusk, the smell returned, faint but clear. It drifted through the house without a source. She checked the sink, the trash, the basement door. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That made her uneasy. When night settled in, she left the lights off. She sat on the couch with her coat still on. Her keys rested in her palm. The porch light didn't turn on this time. That felt worse than if it had. She waited anyway. Hours passed without sound. The field stayed dark. The windows across it stayed black. Just as her shoulders began to drop, she heard it, a sound under the house, not loud, but deliberate. It wasn't scraping, it wasn't knocking. It was a slow shift, like weight being adjusted. Lena pressed her feet flat to the floor. The vibration reached her soles. She pulled them back onto the couch. The sound moved once more, then stopped. Silence followed. She stayed awake until morning. Her eyes burned, but she didn't close them. She was afraid of missing something. At first light, the field looked different. Not damaged, just altered. The grass lay flatter than before, as if something heavy had rested there overnight. No clear marks, just a feeling. She walked to the edge of her yard again, stopped at the same spot as before. The air felt cooler there. The campus gate stood open. The notice had been torn down. The metal swung slightly in the breeze. Lena didn't cross the field. She told herself that was a good sign. Restraint meant control. Later that day, voices carried from the buildings, low and brief. Maintenance, maybe. By evening, the gate was closed again. Chains wrapped tight. Everything looked sealed. That night, the porch light turned on, brighter than before. Too bright. Lena stood slowly. Her legs felt stiff, like they belonged to someone else. She didn't turn it off. Across the field, one window lit up, then another, then a third. All low, all steady, no flicker. The smell filled the room fast. Not just damp now, deeper. Her throat tightened. She tasted metal. Her hands shook. Something moved in the field. Not crossing this time. Standing. It stayed near the center. Low to the ground. Still. Lena didn't step outside. She stayed framed in her doorway. The porch light buzzed above her. The shape shifted. Not forward. Not back. It felt like it was turning. Not toward her. Toward the buildings. A second shape appeared beside it. Smaller, closer to the ground. Lena swallowed hard. Her body leaned forward without permission. She stopped herself. The windows across the field dimmed together, then went dark. All at once, the porch light clicked off. The yard disappeared. Only the smell remained. She closed the door and locked it. Her fingers slipped on the latch. She tried again. That night, the sound returned beneath the house. Not once, twice. The second time, it stayed longer. The floor creaked gently, like a response. Lena pressed her back to the wall. She didn't call anyone. She didn't write anything down. Keeping it inside felt safer. Days passed, then weeks. Autumn leaned toward winter. The field grew pale. The grass thinned. The building seemed lower. Lena stopped using the front door. She entered and left through the back instead. It felt like avoiding eye contact. Some mornings she woke with dirt under her nails, dry and dark. She scrubbed it away without questions. Other nights she dreamed of standing in the field, not moving, listening. In the dreams, the ground always felt soft, like it could give way. She never stepped forward. Winter came quietly. Snow covered the field in one clean layer. Everything looked calm. No footprints crossed the grass, not animal, not human. One evening, the porch light came on again, dimmer than before. Steady. Lena stood in the doorway with her coat on, keys in her hand. Heart steady now. Across the field, nothing moved. No lights, no shapes. The smell drifted past her anyway. Cold and familiar, inviting in a way she didn't like. She took one step forward, then stopped. The ground felt different beneath her shoe. The sound came from below, one slow shift, waiting. Lena stood there, breath fogging the air. Between the door and the field, between staying and going, she listened. Story number 3. There is a silence that comes with heavy snow that feels different from night. It does not feel empty or calm. It feels held, like the world is being pressed flat under a thick, unseen hand. When I was young, that silence felt safe to me. I thought it meant the world was resting. Now it keeps me awake. My name is Arthur Hale. I am 73 years old. Most of my life has been spent indoors, surrounded by paper and numbers. I worked as an accountant for more than 40 years. I trusted systems that could be checked twice. I trusted answers that stayed the same no matter who looked at them. I never enjoyed ghost stories or monster tales. They felt careless and loud. I preferred things that followed rules. There is one memory that does not follow any rule I know. It sits apart from the rest of my life. I learned early not to touch it too often. That memory comes from the winter I turned 12. My parents were not getting along. Their voices filled our house even when they whispered. They sent me away for the school break. They said I would enjoy the quiet. They said it would be good for all of us. My grandfather lived in a place called Blackwood Valley. It sat far north where winter arrived early and stayed late. The road there narrowed until it felt like a path meant to disappear. His house stood alone in the middle of a wide field. Dark timber walls leaned slightly inward with age. Behind it, the forest began without warning. We called him Pop. He was not cruel, but he was distant. Every word he spoke seemed measured. He had lived alone since my grandmother died. The only other presence in the house was his dog, Buster. Buster was old, quiet, and watchful. The first days passed slowly. We split wood and cleared paths. Meals were warm and quiet. I slept better there than I had in months. The silence felt clean at first. It felt earned. The radio warning came on a gray morning. The voice said a heavy storm was coming. Pop turned it off before it finished. He did not argue with the forecast. He prepared without emotion. Wood was stacked higher than usual. Water was filled into every container. Lanterns were checked twice. Nothing was rushed. By mid-afternoon, the sky turned an odd color. Not white or gray, but bruised purple. The air felt thick. Birds vanished from the trees. Buster paced the kitchen and refused to go outside. Even the house seemed tense. The snow began all at once. Large flakes fell straight down. The ground disappeared quickly. Within hours, the porch steps were gone. The world narrowed to walls and windows. Night arrived early. The wind did not howl. It pressed and groaned. The house answered with quiet creaks. We sat in the living room near the fire. One lamp burned low. The power went out without drama. That was when the first sound came. It was dull and heavy. It came from above us. Pop did not react right away. He kept his eyes on the page. But his hands stopped moving. The sound came again. Thump. Then a pause. It did not sound like snow sliding. It sounded placed. Intentional. Buster stood and growled without barking. The hair on his back lifted. Pop closed the book. He went to the windows first. He did not look out, he covered them. Blankets were pulled over curtains. Every inch of glass disappeared. The room grew dimmer. He checked the doors next. Locks slid into place. A chair was wedged under the handle. "Sleep down here tonight," he said. His voice was calm but firm. I did not argue. I slept on the couch in my clothes. Buster did not sleep at all. His eyes stayed open. The sound returned through the night. Slow and spaced. Thump, then slide. It moved across the roof, back and forth, like pacing. I slept in short bursts. When I woke, Pop was still there. He never looked away from the door. I knew the bathroom sometime before dawn. It was upstairs. I waited, then went. The upstairs hallway was freezing. My breath fogged the air. My room glowed blue. The window was uncovered. Moonlight reflected off untouched snow. Everything looked unreal. I stepped closer. The porch roof sat just below the window. Snow lay smooth except for marks. They were deep impressions. Split down the middle, hooves, only too far apart, too heavy. They led to the window. They stopped there. They did not leave. A faint mark clouded the glass. Like breath pressed against it, long and narrow. I tried to step back. My legs felt slow. The yard below shifted. Something crouched near the fence line. White, but not snow white. Bone pale. It unfolded slowly. Too tall, too thin. Its face was wrong. Long and stretched. Hollow. Its eyes caught the moonlight, small and wet, fixed on me. A pressure filled my head. Not words. A pull. Open the window. My hand moved. I cried without sound. The latch was cold. The door slammed behind me. Pop shouted my name. The pressure broke. Pressure broke. He did not look outside. He nailed the curtain shut, hard and fast. We went downstairs together. The fire was fed until it roared. The shotgun rested on his lap. The sound returned before dawn. Circling, scratching. It tested the house. The door handle moved once, then stopped. Pop whispered prayers. Not commands, requests. Morning erased everything. Snow covered all signs. No tracks remained. Pop never explained. He only gave rules. Never answer. Never invite. I left weeks later. The house burned years after. No one spoke of it. I built a careful life. Curtains always closed. Snow always avoided. Tonight, snow presses against my windows again. The street is silent. The roof creaks once. I am writing instead of checking. I am listening. And I am not opening anything. The sound did not come again right away. It waited, as if patience itself was part of it. That waiting pressed harder on my chest than the noise ever had. Pop did not sleep after that. I could tell by the way his breathing never settled. The shotgun stayed across his knees like a promise he did not want to make. Whatever had been on the roof remained there until morning. Sometimes we heard it shift its weight. Other times we only felt the house tighten around us. When gray light finally crept through the cracks around the curtains, Pop told me to stay seated. He opened the door alone, slow and careful. Cold air poured inside like it had been held back on purpose. The snow had erased everything. The roof was smooth. The yard looked untouched and innocent. Pop stood in the doorway for a long time. He did not relax. His shoulders stayed stiff, like he was waiting for something to prove him wrong. Breakfast passed without conversation. The kettle boiled. Spoons scraped bowls, and that was all. Buster would not leave Pop's side. He leaned against Pop's leg and watched the ceiling. Even eating did not distract him. The storm ended, but winter did not loosen its grip. The snow stayed deep for the rest of my visit. The field never showed grass again. Pop nailed blankets over every window that same day, not just at night. All the time, even when the sun was out, the house grew dim and heavy. Day and night blurred together. Time slowed in a way I did not like. I slept in the living room from then on. I did not ask to go upstairs again. Pop never suggested it. Some nights the roof creaked. Not footsteps, just pressure, slow and steady. Each time it happened, Pop's hand tightened around the shotgun. Buster growled once and then went quiet. Eventually the sound would pass. My parents came a week later, smiling too hard. They acted like nothing had changed. I acted the same. Pop hugged me longer than usual. His hand trembled once on my back. He did not say much. As I walked toward the car, he leaned close to my ear. His voice was calm and low. "Don't answer anything that knows your name." I nodded even though I did not understand. The car door shut. The house disappeared behind us. Pop died a few years after that winter. Heart trouble, they said. I did not attend the funeral. The house was sold soon after. A young couple bought it for the quiet. They thought they were lucky. The fire came the following February, an electrical problem according to the paper. The house burned fast and clean. I did not drive out to see it. Some places should stay whole in memory. Ash changes things. I grew older. I chose apartments instead of houses. Higher floors felt safer. I built my life carefully. I avoided snowstorms. I avoided the countryside. I never slept under a roof that slanted toward a window. I never left curtains open, not even a crack. These rules felt reasonable. I told myself it was superstition. A child's fear stretched too far into adulthood. That explanation almost worked. Years passed without incident. Winters came and went. The memory stayed quiet. Until this year. The snow arrived early, heavy and steady. The street lights turned it blue. The silence returned with it. I noticed it right away, that pressing quiet, that feeling of being flattened. I stayed up later than usual. I read numbers on a screen without absorbing them. I listened. Near midnight, I heard it, a single dull sound from above. Not loud, but familiar. Thump. I did not look up. I did not move. I counted my breaths instead. The sound slid once, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped. The silence rushed back in. I told myself it was the house settling. Old buildings make noise. That was always true. Still, I stood and checked the locks. Front door, back door. I checked the windows without pulling the curtains aside. I pressed my hand against the fabric instead. Cold seeped through. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak felt important. Every pause felt watched. Sometime before morning, I dreamed of the field. It was wider than I remembered. The snow was unbroken. I stood in it without leaving marks. The ground felt soft beneath my feet, too soft. When I woke, my jaw ached from clenching it. The room was dim. The curtains were still nailed shut. Days passed. The snow stayed. The silence deepened. I found myself avoiding mirrors at night, avoiding windows during the day, avoiding any thought that wandered too close. One evening I smelled cold air that did not belong inside. It reminded me of that winter long ago. Sharp and empty, I checked the doors again. Everything was locked. The smell faded slowly. That night I heard the roof creak once more. Not a step, a shift. I sat in my chair and waited. My heart beat slow and heavy. I did not pray. Another sound followed. Closer this time. Above my bedroom, I moved to the living room without turning on lights. The floor felt colder there. The walls seemed closer. I sat with my back to the wall, facing the door. It felt familiar. Uncomfortably so. The sound returned, faint but clear. A slow slide. Then nothing. Minutes passed. Then hours. I did not check the time. At some point I realized I was listening for my own name. That thought made my stomach twist. I pressed my lips together and stayed silent. Morning came eventually. The snow outside looked untouched. The roof was clean. I did not feel relief. I felt watched. Since then I have changed small things. I no longer sit near windows at night. I no longer read during storms. Sometimes I catch myself listening too hard, as if listening might summon something. I stop when I notice. Tonight the snow is falling again. The street is quiet. The house feels tight. I have the hammer on the table beside me. The curtains are already nailed shut. That rule never changes. If the sound comes back, I will not answer it. I will not invite it. I will not look. I am older now. Slower, maybe. But I remember the rules. The silence outside presses closer. The roof waits above me. And I stay where I am listening. Story number 4. The wind came in from the sea before I ever heard it. It slipped through the grass and bent it all one way, as if the land itself had decided to lean. That was my first lesson about the Highlands. I moved north because I wanted quiet. London had worn me thin without me noticing. Noise becomes normal until it doesn't. The croft sat alone above the water, its stone walls dark with age. From the front door, the Atlantic stretched out like dull metal under a low sky. The nearest village was miles away, reachable only by a narrow road that disappeared into hills. People told me the place would feel lonely. I told them that was the point. Lonely felt cleaner than crowded. I lived there with my dog, Isla. She was part collie, part something else, all sharp eyes and quick turns. She learned the land faster than I did. At first, everything felt honest. The air smelled of salt and wet grass. Sleep came easily with the sound of waves breaking far below the cliff. The silence was not empty. It felt layered, like something resting beneath something else. I noticed it most at night when the wind dropped. In November, the light began to change. Days shrank into thin gray strips. The sun barely climbed before it slid away again. Fog rolled in from the sea without warning. It clung to the ground and stayed too long. Some mornings I could barely see the fence from the door. Isla started acting strange before I did. She stopped chasing birds along the ridge. She stood still instead, staring out toward the water. Her ears would flatten without sound. A low growl would rise in her chest, then fade. She never took her eyes off the waves. I laughed the first time. Dogs notice things we don't. That's what I told myself. Storms came often that month. Rain fell hard, then stopped suddenly. The land never fully settled between them. One morning, after a long night of wind, the tide pulled far back. The beach stretched wider than I had ever seen it. Gray sand lay exposed where water usually ruled. Isa refused to step onto it. She leaned back on her lead paws, digging in. That was not like her. I followed her gaze and saw something pale among the dark weeds. At a distance, it looked like driftwood. The shape felt wrong even before I named it. Curiosity stepped in before caution could. I walked closer, slow and careful. The fog blurred everything beyond a few steps. The thing lay half buried where the sea had been, white against black kelp. Too still to be alive, I told myself it was an animal. She'd fall from cliffs sometimes. That thought almost held. Up close, the size felt wrong. The body was too broad, too heavy. The proportions didn't settle in my mind. Isla whimpered and pulled back hard. Her paws scraped the sand as she retreated. She would not look again. I crouched and nudged the weeds aside with my boot. The surface beneath was rough, not bone smooth. Hair clung there, coarse and gray. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with cold. This was not something I could place easily. That mattered more than it should have. I stood and stepped away. The fog thickened without warning. The sea faded into gray. Something moved in the water then, not breaking the surface, just shifting it. A slow disturbance, like breath held too long. I did not wait to see more. I turned and walked back toward the path. I did not run. All the way up the cliff, I felt watched. The feeling clung like damp clothes. Even at the door, it did not lift. That night, I closed the curtains early. I locked both doors and checked them twice. Isla paced until her claws clicked on the floor. The house made its usual sounds. Stone settling, wood cooling. None of it felt usual anymore. Sleep would not come. I lay listening to the sea. Isla pressed close to my legs. Near midnight, a sound reached me from above. Not loud, not sudden, a scrape. I held my breath and waited. The sound came again, heavier this time. Something dragged across slate. The roof was pitched and old. Birds landed there often. This was slower than wings. The noise moved edge to edge, pause, then shift. It followed a rhythm. Isla growled, low and steady, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She did not bark. I stayed still. counting seconds. My mind searched for reasons. None of them fit. The sound paused above the chimney. Silence pressed back in. Too thick to feel safe. Morning came pale and cold. I climbed the ladder with shaking hands. The roof bore marks. They ran in pairs across the slate, indented lines, not scratches. Too deep to ignore. I climbed down slowly. The sea below churned without wind. That felt wrong too. I drove into the village that afternoon. The pub smelled of smoke and damp wool. Conversation dipped when I entered. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. They knew enough. An older man at the bar watched me closely. He did not smile. He asked where I lived. When I told him, he nodded once. That was worse than laughter. He said nothing more. I left before dark. The road felt longer on the way back. The hills closed in. The house waited, quiet and unchanged. The air felt heavy again, like pressure before weather. That night the sound returned. Slower now, closer. It crossed the roof and paused above the bedroom. I lay still, eyes open. Isla pressed into me, trembling. I did not look outside. I did not call out. I waited. Just before dawn, it left. No footsteps, no farewell, only absence. In the morning, the beach lay smooth again. No sign of the pale shape. No comfort either. I knew then that leaving would not help. Whatever it was had noticed me. Distance would not matter. By evening, fog rolled in thick and yellow. The smell of salt turned sharp. Isla refused to eat. I sat by the window with the curtains closed. The sea sounded closer than before. Too close. Another scrape touched the roof, then another. Slow, patient. I did not move. I did not answer. I listened. The sound stayed longer this time, as if waiting for something from me, as if it knew my habits already. I realized then that silence can be a question, and sometimes not answering is the only safe reply. I stayed awake until the light returned. My body ached with it. The roof was quiet again. That afternoon, I packed a small bag, not to leave forever, just to feel prepared. Isla watched me without moving. Her eyes followed every step. She did not relax. The sky darkened earlier than it should have. Clouds pressed low over the sea. The wind fell away. I cooked without appetite. Every sound felt amplified. The house felt smaller. When night settled, I left the lights off. Dark felt safer than glow. I sat and waited. The sound came back near midnight. Not scraping now, just wait. It rested above the living room. I could feel it through the beams, a slow, patient presence. Isla whined once and hid under the table. That scared me more than noise. She trusted her instincts. I sat there until my legs went numb. I did not move. I did not breathe deeply. At some point, the weight shifted. A slow slide, then nothing. I stayed where I was until morning. When I stood, my knees shook. The roof was still. I knew then this was only beginning. Whatever I had seen on the beach was not finished. It was changing. The thoughts settled heavy and cold, like the fog that never fully lifts here, like the land itself watching. The first night after I stopped sleeping, I told myself it was temporary. The land had a way of making you feel alert. I said it would pass once I learned its moods. I stayed awake with the lights off, sitting at the kitchen table. The windows faced the sea, but the curtains were drawn. I listened to the house instead. Stone holds sound longer than wood. Every shift travels through it. You feel it in your feet before you hear it. Isla lay under the table, her chin resting on her paws. Her eyes stayed open. They followed the ceiling more than they followed me. Around 2 in the morning, the weight returned. Not scraping this time, just pressure, slow and careful. It settled above the living room. I could feel it through the beams. The table vibrated faintly beneath my hands. I did not move. I did not stand or look up. I counted my breathing until it slowed. pressure stayed for a long time, long enough that my legs began to ache, long enough to feel deliberate. When it finally lifted, it did so gently, like something choosing not to wake a sleeper. That thought stayed with me. Morning came thin and gray. Fog sat low over the grass. The sea sounded closer than usual. I went outside with Ease along the lead. She resisted at the door but followed me. Her body stayed tense. The roof looked unchanged. No fresh marks. No comfort either. I walked the perimeter of the house. The grass bent where wind had pressed it. Nothing else moved. Down the cliff, the tide was high again. The beach was gone. The water looked calm, too calm. I stopped going down there after that. Some things feel safer when you don't confirm them. Distance can be a kind of rule. The village felt different when I returned. People spoke less once I arrived. Eyes moved away quickly. The older man from the bar sat near the window this time. He watched the weather instead of me. That felt intentional. I ordered tea instead of whiskey. My hand shook when I lifted the cup. I set it down untouched. No one asked questions. No one offered advice. That silence said more than words. That night, the fog came inland early. It wrapped a croft in a dull hush. Sound traveled poorly through it. I nailed the bedroom curtains shut before dark. Not carefully. Quick and uneven. Isla watched from the doorway. She did not approach the bed. She stayed low. The pressure returned after midnight, heavier this time, spread wider. It rested above the bedroom first, then shifted toward the chimney. The house groaned once. I pressed my back to the wall and stayed there. The floor felt cold through my clothes. Time thinned. A faint sound followed, not scraping. Breathing. It was slow and wet, like air passing through kelp. I closed my eyes without thinking. That felt important. When the sound stopped, I stayed still. I waited for more. Nothing came. By morning, exhaustion had dulled everything. I moved through the day carefully. Even simple tasks felt chosen. Isla refused to eat again. She drank water and watched the door. Her trust in the house was gone. I packed a bag and left it by the door. Not as a plan, as an option. The fog lifted briefly that afternoon. From the cliff, I could see far out to sea. The water looked empty. Something broke the surface then. Not fully, just enough to disturb the light. I stepped back without thinking. The feeling returned instantly, that sense of being counted. That night, I did not stay inside. I sat in the car with Isla and watched the house. The engine was off. The roof darkened as clouds passed. The silhouette stayed still. Then it changed. A shape rose against the sky, tall and narrow, too slow to be wind. It stood where the roof met the chimney, not moving, facing to sea. Isla whimpered and pressed against my leg. I could not look away. My chest felt tight. The shape leaned forward slightly, as if listening, as if deciding. I did not start the car. I did not leave. I waited. The shape lowered itself and disappeared from view. The roof returned to empty lines. The house looked ordinary again. I drove away before dawn. I did not lock the door. I did not look back. I stayed in the city for weeks. Noise helped at first, then it didn't. Sleep came in short pieces. Dreams carried the sound of breathing. I woke with salt on my tongue. When I returned, the croft felt lighter. The air moved freely. Isla relaxed for the first time in days. Nothing came that night or the next. Silence returned, thin and careful. I began to hope. That was my mistake. Hope loosens rules. The rain started again in early December. Hard and constant. The sea grew restless. On the third night of rain, I smelled it. ozone, and rot, carried on damp air. I closed the curtains and turned off the lights. Dark felt safer. I stayed in the kitchen. The pressure returned just before midnight. Faster this time. Closer. It crossed the roof in a single movement. No pauses. No hesitation. The breathing followed. Clearer now. Intentional. Isla growled low and deep. Her body shook. She did not run. Something tapped the chimney once. Then again. A slow, testing knock. I held my breath and waited. I did not answer. I did not move. The tapping stopped. The pressure lifted. Silence returned. I stayed where I was until morning. My legs numb. My mind blank. I know now that it listens, that it waits for patterns. That attention feeds it. The Highlands are beautiful, but they are not kind. They remember everything. I still live here. I keep the rules simple. I do not answer. At night, when the fog presses close and the roof creaks, I sit very still, and I listen. Story number 5. There is a way the forest sounds when it is deciding whether to let you pass. It is not loud. It is not quiet either. It feels like a pause that lasts too long, like the land is holding its breath. That is what Bennett's Hill always felt like to me. People who live in town think roads always lead somewhere. They believe if you keep driving, you arrive. Bennett's Hill does not work that way. The road is not really a road at all. It looks more like a scar cut into the earth and left open. Dirt, loose gravel, and exposed roots twist together as it climbs. In summer, dust hangs in the air long after a truck passes. It settles on leaves, mailboxes, and skin. Everything turns gray. In winter, the snow fills the ruts until the hill becomes a wall. You cannot climb it without a heavy truck and patience. Even then, the forest decides if you make it. The trees grow too close on both sides. Their branches scrape paint and mirrors. They lean in like they want to hear you breathe. I have driven that road more times than I can count. Every curve lives in my muscles. I slow down without thinking. My name is Samuel. For 30 years, I carried mail through this county. Out here, that meant something different. Some houses sat 5 or 6 miles apart. Some people waited all week for one envelope. I was the only thing that connected them to anyone else. I learned their habits, who waved, who didn't, who wanted to talk, who only opened the door after I left. You notice things when you are alone all day. I retired last fall. My knees had started arguing with every step. The truck felt heavier each year. Still, my mind thinks in routes. I count time by stops. And I still think about the last place on Bennett's Hill. At the very top sat an old house with dark wood siding. The metal roof had rusted red in long streaks. It looked like something bleeding slowly. The house leaned slightly toward the forest, not enough to fall, just enough to look like it was listening. Behind it, the trees grew thick and tight. Sunlight never touched the ground back there. Even in July, it stayed cold. No one had lived in that house for years. An old woman named Mrs. Higgins passed away quietly. After that, the place stayed empty. The windows clouded with grime. Weeds split the driveway open. The porch sagged but never broke. Once a week, I still had to check the mailbox. Rules do not care if a place is empty. Mail has to be accounted for. Most days, the stop felt lonely but harmless. I would roll up, check the box, and leave. The woods never moved. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in late October. The days had started shrinking fast. Cold came early that year. By the time I reached the base of the hill, it was fully dark. The road disappeared into black pine trunks. My headlights cut 2 narrow tunnels ahead. I shifted into low gear and began the climb. The engine groaned, steady and tired. Gravel popped under the tires. The radio had died months earlier. No music, no voices. Just the crunch of stone and the hum of the motor. It made the world feel empty, like nothing existed beyond the hood. About halfway up, something caught my eye. A light flickered in the woods to the right, white and sharp. I eased off the gas. No houses stood there. The Higgins place was still far above. At first, I told myself it was a hunter. Deer season brings people into strange places. That excuse almost worked. The beam moved fast, too fast. It jumped from trunk to ground and back again. It did not move like someone walking carefully. It moved like someone running without concern, like urgency. My hands tightened on the wheel. The truck felt suddenly loud. Even the engine sounded wrong. I thought about stopping. If someone was lost, they might need help. That instinct never left me. I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel ground beneath the tires. I left the engine running. Cold air poured in as I leaned out the window. It smelled like pine sap and wet leaves. Winter waiting. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed thinly. The forest did not answer. The light froze, held steady against a bush, as if listening. Then it turned. Not toward me. Back toward the deeper woods. The beam swept once more. For a second it caught something low and gray. A shape crouched close to the ground. It might have been a shoulder. It might have been a back. It might have been fur. Then the light went out, instantly, as if it had never existed. Darkness rushed back in. My eyes strained against it. Nothing moved. I waited, listened for footsteps, for branches breaking. October leaves never keep secrets. You hear everything, but there was nothing. Silence pressed in from all sides. Thick and complete, it made my stomach tighten. I rolled the window up, locked the doors without thinking. The click sounded too loud. I told myself to leave, to skip the stop. Just this once. I had never skipped a stop in 30 years. Not once. But tonight felt wrong. I drove on, faster than I should have. The truck bounced hard. At the top, the old house waited. Headlights washed over sagging boards. Windows stared back blankly. I turned into the clearing to spin around. My chest felt tight. I wanted to be gone. As the headlights swung past the tree line, I saw it. A tall shape stood just beyond the light. Gray against black. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded and stopped. Dust rose behind me. The shape did not move. It looked wrapped in something long and pale. A coat, maybe. It stood wrong. Too still. Too patient. I reached for the high beams. I needed to see, to know. The light flared bright. The woods emptied. Nothing stood there. Only trees and dead brush. No movement. No sound. I laughed then, a sharp, nervous sound. It echoed inside the cab. "Tired," I muttered, "just tired." The words felt weak. I finished the turn and started down, eyes fixed on the road, hands locked on the wheel. That was when the sound came. Even through closed glass, it cut through. High and desperate. It sounded like a dog, but not barking, screaming. A small animal in terrible pain. The noise went on too long, too sharp. I braked hard. Love for dogs is a weakness. It always has been. I shut off the engine and rolled the window down. The scream came from the woods. Close. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. Cold bit my face. Gravel shifted underfoot. "Hey!" I yelled. "Get away!" My voice shook. I swept the beam between trees. Shadows leapt and twisted, then silence. The sound stopped mid-note. No fade. No echo. I stood there, breathing hard. Flashlight trembling. The woods stared back. I stepped off the road. Leaves crunched softly. I hated that sound. 10 yards in, the road felt far away. Safety shrank quickly. My light caught something pale. At the base of an oak lay white shapes, smooth and round, arranged, river stones, stacked into a perfect circle, too careful. In the center stood a flashlight, old metal, balanced upright. It was turned off, cold to the touch, waiting. I reached out before thinking. My fingers brushed the metal. Then a voice spoke. "Did you find it?" It whispered right beside my ear, dry and soft, like leaves rubbing together. My body locked. Every muscle froze. The air turned sharp with cold. I did not turn around. I could not. Fear rooted me. The flashlight fell from my hand, hit the ground and spun. Light danced wildly. I ran. Age did not matter. Fear carried me. Branches clawed my face. Roots grabbed my feet. I barely stayed upright. Above me the sound returned. The dog's scream. But higher, it moved through the branches, keeping pace, following. I burst onto the road. The truck waited with lights on. Salvation. I dove inside and locked the door. Hands shook violently. Chest burned. The woods fell silent again. Nothing chased. Nothing followed. I drove. Fast and reckless. Never looking back. Town lights appeared like stars, warm and human. I went straight to the sheriff. The sheriff drove me home after that night. He did not turn the radio on. The road filled the silence for us. The cruiser lights washed over the trees as we passed. Red and blue slid across the trunks and disappeared. The forest did not react. When we reached my house, he waited until I went inside. He watched the porch light turn on. Only then did he leave. I stood in the doorway for a long time after. The house felt smaller than it had that morning, like it had shifted inward. I locked the door and checked it twice. Then I checked it again. The sound of the bolt sliding home felt thin. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug I never drank from. The clock ticked too loud. Every small sound felt close. The refrigerator clicked. Pipes shifted in the walls. Each noise made my shoulders tighten. I kept waiting for something else, something that didn't belong. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. The dog sound. But softer this time. It did not scream. It whimpered, low and broken. The sound came from outside, from the direction of the woods behind my house, farther away than before. I stood up slowly. My knees protested. I ignored them. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The yard lay empty under pale moonlight. Frost coated the grass. The sound stopped, just like before, as if it had been waiting for me to listen. I let the curtain fall back into place. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. Something clicked into place in my mind. It was not random. It was not chance. It followed patterns. The next morning, I called in sick. My voice sounded thin even to me. I stayed inside all day. I moved slowly, carefully, like the house might react if I rushed. Even the floorboards felt watchful. Around noon, someone knocked on the door. The sound made my stomach drop. I froze where I stood. The knock came again, careful, polite. I looked through the peephole before opening the door. It was Billy from down the road. His shoulders were hunched. He stepped inside without meeting my eyes. He sat at the table across from me. We did not speak at first. The clock filled the space between us. Each tick landed heavy. Billy rubbed his hands together. Then he told me about his dog, how Buster had chased something into the trees, how the yelping sounded wrong. He said it wasn't like a normal fight. It didn't move the way pain usually does. It felt guided. He told me about the collar, how it had been placed carefully on a rock, how the flashlight stood upright beside it. As he spoke, something settled in my chest. Not fear, recognition. That thing on the hill was not hunting for food. It was not desperate. It was deliberate. It learned what people cared about. It learned what made them stop. Dogs, lights, familiar sounds. After Billy left, I packed a bag. I did not rush. I folded each thing carefully. I chose clothes without thinking. Habit guided my hands. Routine felt safer than choice. I left that evening. I did not lock the door. I did not turn back. Driving away felt wrong, like stepping out of line, like breaking an unspoken rule. In the weeks that followed, I heard stories: a missing hiker, a dog that never came home. Each story sounded familiar. Each one began the same way: a light, a sound, a pause. People talked quietly about Bennett's Hill. Not directly, only around the edges. They said the woods felt closer lately. They said sound traveled strangely there. They said dogs refused to walk certain paths. I moved to the city before winter set in. I traded trees for concrete, silence for noise. At first, the noise helped. Sirens, footsteps, voices through walls. It kept my thoughts scattered. Sleep came easier surrounded by people. The building hummed all night. It felt alive. But sometimes, late at night, the hallway would go quiet. Too quiet, like a held breath. Once, I heard a soft whimper echo through the stairwell. Just once. Then nothing. I stood in my doorway, listening. No one else reacted. That felt important. I stopped walking alone after dark. I avoided parks and tree-lined streets. I stayed where lights stayed on. I learned new rules without meaning to. Do not stop. Do not look too long. Do not answer sounds that feel personal. Do not follow curiosity. Curiosity is a door. Some nights I dream of the hill, the road winding up through trees. Headlights cutting tunnels in dark. In the dream, the truck is always slowing. The light always appears. I always hesitate. I wait before I stop the engine, before I open the door, before I answer. I tell myself it is over. Distance should matter. Time should dull things. But whatever lives on Bennett's Hill does not rush. It does not chase. It waits. It learns routes. It learns habits. It learns people. Somewhere tonight, a flashlight is standing upright, balanced carefully, pointing straight up. Somewhere a sound is being practiced, soft at first, familiar. And somewhere a road is being remembered, waiting for headlights, waiting for a pause. I do not know who will stop next. I only know why I did not, and that knowledge does not feel like safety. It feels like delay. Story number 6. The road to Coldwater Ridge disappears when the snow comes. It does not vanish all at once. It thins first. The gravel shows through in patches, then the edges soften, and the trees lean closer. By the time winter settles in, the road feels more imagined than real. I learned it slowly, during a season when the sky pressed low and the mountain felt awake. The air up there always seemed heavier, like it had been held in place for a long time. Sounds traveled differently. Silence did too. I was not supposed to be there that winter. I had taken the caretaker job only because it paid cash and asked no questions. I needed something quiet, something temporary, something far from people. The lodge had been closed for years. Renovations were always planned and always delayed. Someone needed to keep the pipes from freezing and the doors from blowing open. Someone needed to stay awake while the rest of the valley slept. The lodge sat above the tree line, alone on a wide shelf of rock. From the parking area, you could see miles of forest dropping away, dark and endless. During the day, it was beautiful in a harsh way. At night, it felt exposed, like standing on a stage with no audience. I arrived just before dusk on my first night. Snow drifted sideways, stinging my face when I stepped out of the truck. The building loomed larger than I expected. All timber and stone, its windows dark and unreadable. For a moment, I stood there listening. The wind slid across the walls and vanished around the corners. Somewhere below, trees creaked under the weight of snow. Inside, the air smelled of old varnish and cold iron. My boots echoed too loudly in the entryway. Every sound lingered, as if the lodge took time to decide whether to let it go. I set my bag down and began my routine. I moved room by room, checking locks, checking windows, counting doors. The place was bigger than it needed to be, and that made it feel emptier. The hallway on the main floor ran longer than it should have. The walls were lined with mirrors. They were not arranged neatly or evenly. Some hung straight, others tilted slightly, as if they had shifted over time and no one bothered to fix them. The glass was cloudy and imperfect. My reflection bent and stretched as I walked past. In one mirror, my shoulders looked too wide. In another, my face blurred at the edges. I did not like the mirrors. I told myself it was just a preference, the same way some people dislike heights. Still, I kept my eyes forward and moved quickly. Even then, I felt watched. Not by something in front of me, but by something that moved when I did. I tried not to think about it. Upstairs was quieter. The guest rooms stood empty, their doors ajar, their beds stripped bare. The floors were colder there, the air sharper against my skin. At the end of the hall, a narrow staircase climbed to a small landing and a single door. The door was shut. The door was shut. The handle looked polished, cleaner than the rest of the house. That detail stayed with me. Everything else wore a thin layer of neglect. That handle did not. I stood there longer than I meant to. The silence felt thicker near that door, as if the lodge held its breath. In the end, I told myself it was nothing and walked away. That night, the storm settled in fully. Wind pushed against the lodge in steady waves. Snow slid off the roof with soft, heavy sighs. I built a fire in the main room and sat close to it. The warmth felt temporary, like something borrowed. I ate from a can and listened to the building adjust around me. The lodge made sounds even when nothing else did. Timbers shifted. Walls answered the wind. Somewhere above me, something tapped once and then stopped. Sleep came late and shallow. The cold crept in as the fire faded. My dreams were thin and restless, full of long hallways and bent reflections. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled me awake. Creak. It came from above. I lay still, counting breaths. Old buildings make noise. Wood contracts. Nails shift. I waited for reason to return. Creak. Pause. Creak. It was slower this time. Measured. Like weight being tested. The sound followed a path. I sat up in bed. The room was dim, lit only by embers. My breath fogged faintly in the air. The sound came again, closer now. Down the narrow stairs, onto the upper hallway. Each step announced itself softly, patiently. My door did not latch properly. I had noticed that earlier and made a note to fix it. Now it felt important in a way I could not explain. The footsteps stopped outside. I held my breath. The handle did not turn. The wood did not shift. After a long moment, the weight moved on. Boards complained softly as it passed. I listened until the sound reached the far end of the hall, then the small staircase, then nothing at all. I did not move. I stayed where I was, staring at the dark, waiting for my heart to slow down. That was when the singing started. It drifted into the walls, thin and distant. A child's tune, slow and uncertain, as if the singer was learning it for the first time. The words did not carry, only the shape of them. Rising and falling, gentle and sad. I swung my legs out of bed and stood. The floor was ice cold under my feet. I moved toward the window without thinking. Snow covered everything in a smooth, untouched sheet. No tracks, no figures. The trees stood heavy and still. The singing felt closer anyway. It pressed against the glass, not loud, just present, like breath. Behind me, the hallway light flicked on. I turned too fast. My reflection broke across the mirrors in the hall, splitting into fragments. For a moment, I could not tell which one was me. The attic door stood open. Cold air spilled down the stairs, carrying a faint metallic smell. It reminded me of old coins or blood on snow, though I could not say why. The mirrors along the hall reflected the light back at me in fractured strips. The cracks had not been there before. I was sure of it. Something moved in the glass. Not in front of me. Behind, I stepped back, heart pounding. My heel caught on the rug and I nearly fell. The singing stopped at the same moment, cutting off like a breath held too long. Downstairs, the rocking chair in the lounge began to move. I could hear it from where I stood. The slow, patient creak of wood on wood, back and forth, steady as breathing. I did not go to look. I stayed where I was, staring at my own reflection breaking apart across the mirrors. The chair kept moving. The sound settled into the house, becoming part of it, like it had always been there. Time stretched. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for my legs to ache. Long enough for fear to feel dull and heavy. When the first gray light of morning reached the windows, the lodge fell silent. The attic door was closed. The rocking chair stood still. I walked the hallway slowly. Every mirror was cracked. Lines spread from their centers like frozen lightning, delicate and sharp. On the floor, faint, damp prints marked a path from the attic to the nearest mirror. Small ones, careful ones, they did not lead away. I left that morning without packing properly. I did not check the fire. I did not lock every door. I just needed to be off the mountain. I told myself it was stress, isolation, weather. I told myself that old places hold cold the way they hold dust. 10 years have passed since then. I have lived in apartments and houses that hum with other people. I avoid long hallways. I avoid mirrors that distort. Last night in my apartment far from the mountains, I woke to the sound of wood moving under weight. Slow, patient. I do not own a rocking chair. The mirrors never came with us when we left the lodge. We made sure of that. Still, something followed. For the first few nights back in the city, sleep felt thin and fragile. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to pipes ticking and traffic breathing outside the window. Every sound felt closer than it should. I kept a small lamp on beside my bed. Not bright, just enough to give the dark edges. David tried to joke about it when we talked. He said old places mess with your head. He said fear fills in gaps when the mind gets tired. He laughed, but the laugh never reached his chest. There was always a pause after it, like he was listening for something else. Mark did not joke at all. He stopped sleeping within a week. He drank coffee at midnight and paced until dawn. He said the silence bothered him now. He said quiet rooms felt crowded. He started leaving the television on just to have moving light. Sam moved back in with his parents. He told them the altitude made him sick. He never said anything about mirrors. We did not talk about the attic. We did not talk about the voice. We agreed, without saying it out loud, that speaking might pull the memory closer. Life kept moving anyway. Jobs resumed. Phones buzzed. The city swallowed us back up. Crowds returned. Schedules filled in. But small things felt wrong. Not dramatic things. Quiet ones. Glass caught my attention more than it used to. Store windows. Bathroom mirrors. Phone screens when they went dark. Televisions before they powered on. Anything that could show me myself. I started noticing reflections that lagged. Not much. Just a fraction of a second. I would lift my hand. The reflection would follow, slightly late. Enough to make my stomach tighten. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was sleep debt. I avoided looking too long. I rearranged my apartment without planning to. I turned mirrors toward walls. I moved lamps so light never hit glass directly. I stopped using the bathroom light at night. I washed my hands in the kitchen sink instead. It felt easier not to see my face half awake. Some nights I thought I heard movement, soft shifting, like weight settling into wood. It never lasted long, just a few seconds, long enough to make me stop breathing. I stayed very still when that happened. I counted breaths. I gated for the sound to fade, because waiting felt safer than checking. About a month later, David called me late at night. His name on the screen made my chest tighten. I answered too quickly. "Do you hear singing?" he asked. I sat up in bed. The room was quiet. Too quiet. "No," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. I heard movement on his end. Fabric brushing against a microphone. "It's coming from my bathroom," he said. I turned the fan off. It's still there. The sound reached me through the phone then. Thin, uneven. It was the same shape as the tune at the lodge. Slow, uncertain. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to tell him to run outside and never go back in. But my mouth felt heavy. "Don't look in the mirror," I said. The words came out before I thought about them. David laughed once. It sounded forced. It sounded wrong. "Why would I do that?" he said. The singing grew louder, not clearer, closer. I could hear his breathing change. Shorter, faster. Then the call ended, not with a click, just silence. I tried calling back. It rang and rang, no answer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed until morning. The lamp stayed on. When I went to David's apartment the next day, the door was unlocked. The place was empty. Clean, like he had stepped out for a moment. Shoes still by the door. Keys still on the counter. Phone charger plugged in. In the bathroom, the mirror was cracked. Not shattered, just split from the center. The crack spread outward in thin lines, like ice breaking on a lake, like something had pressed from the other side. There were fingerprints on the glass, small ones, pressed from the inside. I stepped back and sat on the edge of the tub. The room smelled faintly damp, like cold air trapped too long. The police came later. They asked questions. They wrote things down. They said adults leave sometimes. They said stress does strange things. They said not to jump to conclusions. I stopped correcting them. There were no words that fit. After that, my habits changed completely. I covered mirrors at night. I turned them face down. I stopped answering unknown calls after dark. I stopped listening to music before bed. Silence felt safer than sound. I kept lights low, bright enough to see, dim enough not to reflect. I moved slowly in my own home. I avoided sudden movements near glass. I avoided standing still too long. Sometimes when I woke up, I heard movement, soft shifting, wood answering weight. It always came from the living room, never close, never far. I stayed still when that happened. I counted breaths. I waited for it to pass, because I understood something then. The lodge was not the source. It was only a place where the rules were thin. Whatever lived in the glass did not need mountains. It did not need storms. It did not need isolation. It only needed attention. It only needed an opening, a pause, a moment of looking. Weeks passed, then months. The sounds became less frequent. I started to believe distance mattered. I started to believe time dulled things. I started to relax. That was the mistake. Last night I caught my reflection smiling when I wasn't. Just for a second. Just long enough to notice. The smile was small, curious, patient. I turned the mirror face down after that. My hands shook as I did it. The glass felt cold. I slept on the couch. The lamp stayed on. I did not dream. This morning, my phone screen stayed dark longer than it should have. When it lit up, there was a smudge where my face should be. Like a hand had rested there. I wiped it clean. I did not check again. I did not want to see if it came back. Now, as evening settles, the apartment feels different. Not heavier. Quieter. The kind of quiet that waits. Somewhere I know there is a hallway that never ends. Somewhere, glass is still breaking slowly. Somewhere, something is learning. It learned my voice. It learned David's. It learned how long people hesitate. And tonight, when the building settles and the city noise fades, I will listen carefully. Not for singing, for creaking. Story number 7. The house we lived in was not haunted. It was just old. It was a big, square farmhouse that sat in the middle of a cornfield. The corn grew tall in the summer, so tall that you could not see the road from the front porch. In the winter, when the corn was cut down, the field looked like a flat, brown ocean. Wind rolled across it without anything to stop it, slamming into the house and shaking the windows hard enough to make the glass rattle. My name is Sarah. I have lived in the country my whole life. I am used to quiet nights and wide skies. I am used to darkness without street lights and long stretches of road with no houses. But 5 years ago, I learned something important. The dark is not always empty, and quiet does not always mean safe. My husband Jack worked for the railroad. He repaired tracks and checked signals. It was steady work, but it came with long nights. His shift started in the evening and ended after sunrise. Most nights he left the house around 6 and came home close to 6 in the morning. For 12 hours at a time, the house and the kids were mine alone. We had 3 children then. They were young and loud during the day, but at night they slept hard. By 8 o'clock, the upstairs was quiet. Their doors were closed, their night lights glowing softly. That was when the house felt the biggest, like it had grown wider once they were asleep. I used to think I was brave. I laughed at scary movies and creepy stories. I joked online about strange noises and shadows. I posted funny comments late at night telling friends I heard something in the basement or saw movement outside. People liked the posts. They laughed with me. I never thought twice about it. One night in October, I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The kitchen sat at the back of the house and faced the yard. A wide glass door looked out toward the swing set and the old shed where Jack kept tools. Past the shed was nothing but cornfield and darkness. It was fully dark outside. Inside, the lights were bright, so the glass door acted like a mirror. I could see my reflection clearly. I could see the counter, the table, the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds. I reached for another plate when something moved in the reflection. I screamed and dropped the plate. It shattered on the tile, sharp pieces sliding across the floor. I spun around, heart racing, gripping the knife from the sink. But there was nothing there. No one in the kitchen. No one in the yard. It had only been me. My arm moved, and the reflection followed. That was all. I felt foolish standing there with the knife. I laughed out loud to calm myself. I swept up the broken plate, shaking my head. Later, I posted about it online, joking that I scared myself again and needed more sleep. I did not know then that someone really had been watching me. About a week later, the moon was full and bright. It lit the yard so well that it looked pale and washed out like an old photo. The swing chains gleamed. The grass looked silver. Even the tree line at the edge of the field was clear. That night, I was in the bedroom on the first floor. Jack and I slept downstairs so we could hear the kids if they needed us. I lay in bed reading, waiting for sleep to come. The house was quiet and still. When I turned off the lamp, the room did not go fully dark. Moonlight poured through the window and landed in a clean square on the floor. Tree branches cast shadows that stretched and twisted along the wall. I watched them move slowly as the wind shifted. My thoughts wandered to chores and errands. Nothing important, just small, normal things. Then the light on the floor changed. The bright square dimmed, as if someone had stepped between the moon and the window. I frowned and looked up. The sky was clear. No clouds passed overhead. A shadow slid across the glass. It was not thin like a branch. It was solid, tall, the shape of a person walking past the window. It moved slowly, steady and quiet. I stopped breathing. My body went stiff under the blanket. I told myself it was an animal. We had deer and coyotes. They passed through all the time. But animals do not walk upright. They do not pause mid-step. The shadow returned, crossing the window again, slower this time. Then it stopped. It stopped right in the center of the glass. Whoever it was stood there, facing into my room. I could not see details, only the outline of shoulders and a head, but I felt the weight of being watched. The feeling pressed into my chest. I stayed perfectly still. I did not move a muscle. My phone was across the room, but I could not reach it without being seen. After what felt like forever, the shape shifted and moved away. The shadow slipped off the window and disappeared around the corner of the house. I did not wait. I ran for the phone and locked the bedroom door. I checked every door on the first floor, my hands shaking. Then I sat in the hallway away from the windows, my back against the wall. I did not call the police first. I called Jack's father, Frank. He lived nearby and owned the surrounding farmland. He was not the type to panic. He answered on the second ring. When I told him someone had been outside, his voice changed. He said he was coming and told me to call the police next. The operator kept me calm. She asked questions. She told me help was on the way. Frank arrived first, headlights flooding the yard. He came inside with his rifle and went back out to check the property. Soon after, a deputy arrived and joined him. I watched through the door as flashlights swept the grass and fence. The deputy took his time, but did not seem alarmed. When he finished, he told me there were no footprints. The grass under the window was wet with dew. If someone had stood there, it should have been pressed flat. It was untouched. He suggested shadows, imagination, nerves. He left without much concern. Frank stayed until Jack arrived home. Jack went outside himself and found what the deputy had missed. Footprints under the window, heavy ones, and a place behind the fence where someone had been sitting. That night, none of us slept. After that, we changed how we lived. Curtains stayed closed, lights stayed on, Jack changed shifts. We installed cameras and new locks. I stopped posting about my life online. Months passed. Fear softened but never left. About a year later, I cleaned the shed during the afternoon. Behind old tires, I found candy wrappers and carved into the wood tally marks. 30 of them. Someone had been there for a long time, watching, waiting. Jack burned the shed down a week later. We moved after that. Now we live in a city. I like the noise. I like the lights. I like the sound a door makes when it locks. But sometimes, alone at night, I think about that window. I think about the shadow that stood there without leaving tracks, and I wonder how many nights it watched us before I finally noticed. We thought moving would erase it. New streets, new walls, new sounds layered on top of each other. The city felt crowded in a way that made my chest loosen. There were neighbors above us and below us, doors opening and closing at all hours, voices through thin walls. There were lights in every window at night, even late ones, and no open fields where someone could stand unseen. For a while, it worked. Weeks passed without me jumping at shadows. I stopped holding my breath when I washed dishes at night. I let the curtains stay open sometimes, just a little, enough to see the street lights flicker across the ceiling. The kids adjusted fast. They made friends in the building and learned which neighbor had a dog and which one had candy. They forgot the farmhouse, the shed, the nights when we slept with the lights on. I watched them laugh and felt something loosen inside me. I wanted that forgetting more than anything. Jack tried to act normal too. He stopped checking the locks twice before bed. He stopped sitting up on the couch with the television muted, listening to the building breathe. He changed jobs again, closer to home, earlier hours. We told ourselves the fear belonged to another version of us. I still had trouble sleeping. Even with traffic outside and sirens cutting through the night, I woke up for no clear reason. Sometimes it felt like someone had said my name, softly, almost kindly. Other times it felt like I had missed something important while asleep. I would lie there staring at the ceiling fan, counting its turns until my heart slowed. Then small things started happening. So small I felt foolish noticing them. The first time I brushed it off, the security camera sent an alert while I was folding laundry. Motion detected. I checked the feed and saw the alley behind the building, empty except for trash bags and a dented dumpster. I told myself it was a cat or passing shadow. A week later, it happened again. Same alert, same empty image. Jack said sensors glitch. He said technology is never perfect. I nodded and smiled and tried not to think about how the alert came at the same time both nights. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway closet, I found something that didn't belong. It was a candy wrapper folded neatly and tucked behind a box of old shoes. The brand was the same one I found in the shed years ago. I stared at it until my eyes burned, then threw it away and washed my hands. I didn't tell Jack. I told myself it was old, that it could have come from anywhere. But I started noticing patterns after that, sounds that repeated, the hallway light flickering at the same hour each night, the elevator pausing one floor too long before moving again. None of it was enough to point to. All of it felt familiar. One night while brushing my teeth, I looked up and froze. There was a smear on the bathroom mirror, faint and greasy like a fingerprint dragged across the glass. It wiped away easily with a towel, leaving no mark behind. Still, my hand shook long after. I began checking places I didn't need to check. Under the bed, even though nothing could fit there. Inside cabinets that only held plates. Behind the shower curtain before stepping in, I laughed at myself while doing it, like that made it harmless. Jack noticed. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. We both pretended to believe it. The kids slept through everything. That made it worse in a way. Their breathing was steady and soft at night, untouched by whatever pressed against my thoughts. I watched their faces sometimes and promised myself I would never let them feel what I felt. Late one evening, I was alone in the apartment. Jack had taken the kids to his parents' house for the night. I said I wanted quiet. That was true. I also wanted to know if the feeling would follow me when no one else was there. The building sounded different without them. Louder, but emptier too. Pipes knocked in the walls. Someone walked above me, slow and heavy. A door closed far down the hall and echoed longer than it should have. I made tea and sat on the couch with all the lights on. The television stayed off. I wanted to hear everything. Around midnight, the camera alert chimed again. Motion detected. This time, when I checked the feed, I saw something. Not clearly, just a shape at the far end of the alley, half hidden behind the dumpster. It stayed still for a moment. It felt stretched thin, then moved out of frame. I replayed the clip again and again. The shape never crossed fully into view. I locked the door and slid the chain into place, the sound loud in the quiet room. That night I dreamed of the farmhouse. Not the house itself, but the space behind it. The narrow strip of dirt between the fence and the field. In the dream, the corn didn't move. It didn't rustle or sway. It just stood there, watching. I woke to a sound, a soft scrape. It came from inside the apartment. Not loud, not rushed. Like something being moved carefully across the floor. I sat up, heart hammering, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the living room in harsh white lines. Everything looked normal at first. Couch, table, door. Then I saw the floor. There were marks in the dust near the front door, long, faint lines, like someone had been sitting there and shifted their weight. They weren't deep, but they were deliberate. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them as if they might fade if I watched. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Jack, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer right away. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. No breathing, no movement. Just the low hum of the building and my own pulse. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. The lights buzzed overhead. Nothing moved. On the carpet just outside my apartment, there was something small. A plastic toy, green. An army man missing an arm. One of a kid's toys, but not one we had brought with us. I closed the door and slid down against it, shaking until the cold seeped through my clothes. Jack came home early the next morning. I showed him everything. The video, the marks, the toy. He didn't interrupt, he didn't argue. He just washed my face while I talked, like he was looking for cracks. That afternoon, he called the building manager. They checked the cameras together. Nothing unusual. No loitering, no break-ins, no reports from other tenants. We added another lock anyway. A few days later, I took the trash out alone. I chose the stairs instead of the elevator, wanting the movement. Halfway down, I smelled something that stopped me cold. Old dust, candy, stale air. I followed the smell without thinking, under the stairwell. Behind stacked cleaning supplies, someone had made a space. Small, tight. Just enough to sit. Just enough to wait. On the wall, scratched lightly into the paint, were tally marks. Not many. 3. I stood there until my legs went numb, staring at them as if they might start changing while I watched. We didn't call the police this time. We packed that night. We took the kids back to Jack's parents and left the apartment empty, lights off, locks unused. Now we were looking again. Another place, another start. Jack says, This time we choose somewhere busy, somewhere loud, somewhere with cameras everywhere. I nod and let him talk. But tonight, alone in the guest room, I keep thinking about those marks, about how few there were. I keep wondering when the counting started and whether it starts over when we move.